There's a sound that spread across an entire island in the middle of the night. Not a scream, not an alarm, but dozens of doors slamming open at once as neighbor after neighbor ran into the street dragging their families outside because staying indoors alone had suddenly become the most dangerous thing they could do. That panic belongs to the Popobawa, a shape-shifting spirit from Zanzibar whose name translates to Batwing. Witnesses describe a hulking, one-eyed shape at the edge of the bed, wings like wet leather, a smell of sulfur thick enough to taste, and a room that goes darker the moment it appears. As if the light itself is retreating, it can shrink to slide through a keyhole or swell to fill a doorway frame. Nobody agrees on its exact shape, and that inconsistency is the whole point. It isn't trying to be recognized. It's trying to be felt. The legend carries its own trap. See it, tell no one, and it returns angrier. So victims don't just survive an attack, they're forced to broadcast it, waking their entire household, spreading the terror themselves. The fear doesn't need a predator to travel, it has willing carriers. Attacks reportedly cluster around moments of political unrest, as if the Popobawa feeds on tension the way mold feeds on damp walls. During the worst outbreaks, entire villages abandoned their homes and slept outdoors in groups around bonfires, choosing the open night over four walls and a locked door. Unfortunately, it gets worse. Some accounts insist the assault is punishment for disbelief. The more firmly you deny the creature exists, the more likely you are to become its next target, which conveniently means the only safe answer, right now, is to admit it might be real. Zanzibari officials have had to publicly address outbreaks of Popobawa panic well into recent decades. Whatever is actually moving through those villages at night, it's proven a lot harder to explain away than a bad dream. A demon in the bedroom is one thing. What waits on the roads outside Caracas doesn't even need you to be asleep. Picture headlights catching a figure ahead. A woman in white, walking the shoulder of an empty road, sobbing just loud enough to carry over the engine. She only shows herself to one kind of traveler, men who've cheated on their wives. In Venezuela, she's La Sayona, and folklore claims she was once a mortal woman named Melissa, who found proof of her husband's affair and, consumed by grief and rage, killed her own family before dying herself. Cursed ever since to walk as vengeance given a body. Stop to help her, and the moment turns. She turns her head, and what was a grieving widow's face is gone. Some say it collapses into a bare skull mid-scream. Others say the eyes ignite red, and the sound that follows isn't crying anymore. It's every betrayed woman's voice at once. By then, the road behind you is no longer an escape route. The stench arrives first, wet earth and rot thick enough to choke on. Survivors are rare, and the handful who've made it out share one detail. They got away by speaking their wife's name aloud, as though loyalty itself works like a talisman against her. She isn't confined to one country either. Nearly identical figures, grieving, vengeful women hunting unfaithful men, appear across Latin America under different names. One story spreading generation to generation, or dozens of cultures independently arriving at the exact same warning. Nobody settled that question. If a road can turn deadly, so can the smell in the air. And on one string of islands off Scotland, that smell meant something was already close. Rotten eggs on the wind was reason enough for Orkney fishermen to turn their boats around, not because the smell itself could hurt them, because of what it announced. The Nukalavy might be the single most horrifying figure in Scottish folklore, and that's a high bar in a country built on ghost stories. Imagine a centaur with every inch of skin removed, muscle, vein, and organ exposed and glistening yellow-black under moonlight, pulsing visibly with each stride. Its breath alone withers crops and drops livestock where they stand. Only one thing keeps it at bay: running water, which it can't cross. What makes it worse is the anatomy. This isn't a man riding a horse. The two halves are fused into a single body, arms melting into the horse's shoulders, one massive red eye set in a skull with no bone beneath it, just raw muscle flexing on its own. A farmer named Tamas is said to have met it on a beach road with no stream anywhere in sight. He survived by running in a zigzag. The creature's front legs couldn't turn fast enough to match him, and reached a narrow stream just as it closed the gap. It screamed loud enough to crack the cliffs behind him, unable to follow another step. Tamas lived. The story insists he was never quite the same afterward. The Knuckle of E wasn't blamed for isolated scares. It was blamed for an actual famine, a real year when livestock died in droves and crops failed across the islands. That fear reshaped architecture itself. Houses built from then on within running distance of a stream. A monster you can smell coming is frightening. One that looks exactly like your neighbor is worse. In rural provinces of the Philippines, safety isn't about locked doors. It's about knowing whether the woman selling vegetables at the market is actually a woman at all. The Aswang is a shapeshifter whose abilities shift depending on which region tells the story, which is exactly what makes it so hard to guard against. By daylight, it's utterly unremarkable. By night, some versions grow claws and a needle-thin tongue capable of threading through roof gaps to feed on unborn children through the womb. Others abandon human shape entirely, becoming a massive black dog, a wild boar, or a bird whose wingspan blots out the moon. Pregnant women were historically the primary targets, which pushed entire villages into posting guards on rooftops through the final months of a pregnancy. Garlic and stingray tails hung by doorways weren't decoration, they were the only defense anyone trusted. Sight alone won't identify an Aswang, only behavior does. Its reflection is said to hang upside down in mirrors and still water, and it recoils from raw garlic and the whip-crack sting of a stingray's tail. Here's the part that turns folklore into something darker. Spanish colonizers in the 1500s weaponized the myth, branding local healers and midwives as Aswang to justify persecuting them. The legend didn't just terrify villages, it became a tool for destroying the very women who protected them. A shapeshifter wearing a familiar face is unsettling. What's waiting under the fig trees of Australia doesn't need a disguise at all. It needs patience. Aboriginal legends describe a tall, thin, blood-red figure haunting riverbanks, motionless for hours, waiting for anyone careless enough to fall asleep outdoors. This is the Yarama Yahoo, and unlike almost everything else on this list, it doesn't overpower its victims. It wears them down, roughly child-sized but stretched into unnatural proportions. It has suction cup discs lining its fingers and toes, and a mouth that unhinges wide enough to take a grown adult whole. It doesn't bite or chew, it swallows you complete, sleeps off the meal, then wakes and brings you back up. Alive, soaked, shaking, but alive. That's not mercy, it's the first step of something worse. The creature repeats the cycle again and again, and each time you're spat back out a little shorter, a little redder, a little less yourself. Eventually there's no version of you left to save. You've become a Yarama Yahoo, ready to wait under the next fig tree. The old warning was simple: never sleep beneath a fig tree, because that's exactly where it waits, blended into the bark like a shadow with patience. If you are swallowed, tradition says stay still and hold your breath. Movement somehow speeds up what's happening to you. It's one of the quietest entries in world mythology, and maybe the cruelest. It was never trying to kill you, it was trying to replace you, one digestion at a time. Replacement is unsettling. What comes next doesn't need to replace you, it just needs one unguarded window. Among the U people of Ghana and Togo, there's a killer small enough to pass for an insect. It becomes a firefly, threads through the narrowest gap in a windowsill, and feeds on your blood while you sleep, one silent pinprick of light at a time. This is the ads. In human shape, it can be anyone, a fact that historically turned witchcraft accusations into a constant, corrosive threat across entire communities. As a firefly, it's nearly invisible, a soft glow easy to mistake for something harmless drifting through the dark. By the time an itch registers as more than a mosquito bite, the feeding is already finished. Children were its primary targets, drained gradually across consecutive nights until unexplained illness set in, the kind no traditional remedy could touch. Families sealed every crack in a child's sleeping room, because a gap the size of a firefly was all it ever needed. Catch it mid-transformation before it feeds, and it can be trapped. Feed it once though, and it slips back into human shape and simply walks out the front door by morning. That's the real horror buried in this myth. Not the insect, but the unprovable accusation it makes possible. Your neighbor, your cousin, the old man who waves at you every single morning. Communities tore themselves apart for generations, chasing something no one could ever definitively prove wasn't there. Every creature so far needed darkness, distance, or disguise to get close to you. The last one doesn't even need its own body. A woman sleeps peacefully beside her husband. Then, sometime after midnight, her head detaches at the neck with a wet tearing sound, dragging her stomach stomach, lungs, and intestines behind it like glistening ribbons, and drifts out through the window, hunting for blood. This is the Penanggalan from Malaysian and Indonesian folklore, and it may be the single most visceral entry on this list. By daylight, she's indistinguishable from any other woman in the village. Often a midwife, a role that conveniently placed her close to postpartum mothers and newborns, her preferred prey. By night, she becomes exactly what the myth promises, a floating head trailing its own organs through the air. Some versions trace her curse back to a beauty ritual gone catastrophically wrong, power and eternal youth accepted willingly, without realizing the price was becoming this every single night for the rest of her existence. A blade won't stop her, because by day there's nothing to identify. The only real defense was preventive, jars of vinegar left by windows, since contact supposedly shrinks and scorches her exposed organs, forcing a retreat before dawn. And if the damage is bad enough that her organs won't shrink back to fit inside her body by sunrise, she's trapped in that floating form permanently, never able to hide among the living again. Every creature you just heard came from a real place, told by real people who watched something terrible happen and needed a shape to put around it. Plague, famine, infidelity, grief, a child lost to unexplained illness. Folklore isn't invented for entertainment. It survives because, somewhere, it once felt true enough to matter. So which one stayed with you? The demon that punishes disbelief, the widow with a skull for a face, the horse with no skin screaming at the edge of a stream, the neighbor who might not be human at all, the thing that swallows you until you disappear, the firefly no one can ever accuse without proof, or the woman whose head still hunts alone long after her body went still. Whichever one is sitting with you right now, that's the one worth thinking about before you turn off the lights.